about Western issues for a bit. We talked about the importance of geographic diversity on the court, and people are saying, well, what does that mean? Is there really a difference? Is there really a Western perspective that somebody can bring? Let me go through a few of the issues that you've encountered, and we'll flesh that out. Let me introduce, for the record, a letter from one of Judge Gorsuch's former clerks. Well, also, let's do it from a federal judge in Montana. But let me talk about for a second some of the policies that come out. In one case, you rejected the idea that a dormant commerce clause prevents Colorado from requiring that 20% of electricity would come from renewable sources. Now, whether or not you agree with that policy, and there's a lot of disagreement around here about that, but we don't live in Colorado. You do. So its wisdom isn't really our business. Would you agree that the principles of federalism allow states to experiment with policies like environmental protection in this sense?
Senator, that was the holding of my court in that case. Colorado had passed by voter referendum a law that, as I recall, sitting here, indicated that 20% of energy in Colorado had to be from renewable sources by a date certain. That law was challenged by fossil fuel producers out of state, alleging that it violated what's called the Dormant Commerce Clause under the federal Constitution and case law interpreting it. And I did write for a unanimous panel that there was no constitutional violation and the state was permitted to proceed with its experiment.
Is that indicative of the concept of laboratories of democracy that states have been described as?
Consistent with that principle.
All right. Well, thank you. One complicated issue that we have in the West that you really don't get as much elsewhere is the split estate property rights. It's possible that I might own a parcel of land, but somebody else might own the mineral rights, and still somebody else might own the water rights. Have you encountered that in your jurisprudence?
It is very different than out here. And yes, I have. Split estates, as you know, are a common feature in the West, and in part, at least, a byproduct of homesteading acts by this Congress, where initially, as I recall, Congress gave homesteaders rights down to the center of the earth, as is common out here. Mm-hmm. Then they found out, my gosh, there's some valuable stuff under there, and they started splitting the estates so that homesteaders could do what they wanted to do on the surface estate, but that the Congress and the people could control some of the valuable mineral rights underneath. Very complicated stuff. Yes, I've encountered those cases too.
Is that a perspective that you think would be useful on the Supreme Court?
I think that's for this body to decide.
All right. Well, thank you. Also, another aspect of living in the American West is that we share a lot of land with the Indian tribes, and the prevalence of tribes out west can complicate things in the legal sense. Say, deciding between municipalities or local or state government. What have you ruled on or have you dealt with in terms of relationship between state and local government and the tribes?
Senator, I've had a number of tribal cases. And tribes are, as you know, sovereign nations. And our constitutional order affords this body considerable power in dealing with those sovereign nations by treaty and otherwise. And out west, there are all sorts of variations on that arrangement. There are classic reservations, as many people in the East conceive of them. There are also ancient pueblos that predate this country by many hundreds of years. Then there are allotments to individuals and groups. Depends where you are. That sounds like Oklahoma. Pueblo sounds like New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And then when I think of reservations, I think of Utah and some places in Colorado and Wyoming. And there are variations all throughout the American West. Mm-hmm. You know, our history with Native Americans is not the prettiest history. And as a judge, you try very hard to administer the law fairly without respect to persons and equally. And I'd point you maybe to my cases involving the Ute Indian tribe, where they've had a long time trying to control their tribal lands. Or Fletcher, involving the Osage Nation in Oklahoma, and the right to an accounting of the property due them under agreements with the United States. Try to treat all persons who come before me fairly.
That's also a perspective that a Western member can bring to the Supreme Court. That's my supposition. I know you won't say that, but I think that that's useful. While the chairman is here, let me ask for unanimous consent to enter a record, or into the record, a letter from Alaska senators on behalf of Indian tribes.
Yes.
Also, one from a law school clerk, and also one from a judge in Montana.
Those documents, without objection, will be entered.
Thank you. Let's turn for a minute to